So most people overcommit when they start using Claude Code because they see all the fancy stuff people are building out there. So when they go out and try and build it, it breaks, it doesn't work, it takes too long. So then they just don't really integrate it into their day-to-day lives. So what I wanted to break down in this video, because I've been deep in the rabbit hole of AI, is just around how to start thinking about using it and adopting it in your day to day, because I think that's where it's most important to start off with before you get into the bigger audacious projects. It's just looking at what are the small wins that you can stack up that are useful in your day to day so that you can start using it regularly rather than trying to build off this one project that just turns out to go nowhere and then you just start again. So, and why this is important, I'll start off with this, is because I made the mistake of starting to use Claude Code and building projects out. And what is different about Claude Code to your normal Claude instance or ChatGPT is that they have working memory, whereas your Claude Code instance it doesn't have anything. So it just starts up fresh every time. So what's very powerful to do in the first instance is everyone talks about this Claude.md file, and it is important. But I'll tell you what's just as equally important. So the Claude.md, what this is going to basically communicate is how Claude works for you. So think about your directories, your folders, how things are set up and how you want it to interact, how you want it to interact with you, right? But what's just as important is this context. And context is massively important because what you can think about is basically that what you are launching is a folders and file system. That is all you're doing in Claude Code. This is it. So when you give Claude Code access, it basically has access to a folder and it can create subfolders and then it can create files. And that's pretty much all you need to know to get started. And why this is important is because you can start looking at each of those folders as different workspaces, and each of those workspaces can have different context. You can have an overall context about yourself, about the business, about what you're into, about your wins, about your experiences, about your losses. That gives Claude, every time it starts up, context as to who you are. And then underneath that, you can have that context running through each of the different workspaces that will be independent to those workspaces, and outside of those workspaces, there's no relevance there. Why that's important, and this is what I learned, is that you've got something called tokens, right? So I'm gonna zoom out a bit. So this is your Claude Code, right? Because essentially you boot it up using an IDE, which is either you're going to be using, I like VS Code because it's simple. And let me zoom in here. So you got VS Code and you got anti-gravity and you got cursor. And essentially all these are is just an easy way to manage your files and your folders. So you've got Claude Code that you embed into VS Code, anti-gravity or cursor. So that allows you to use Claude Code. It allows you to use Gemini. It allows you to use ChatGPT or Codex. And this basically just makes it very easy to speak to the folders and to start building out this mission control that you have. So what you want to think of is, so here you've got your, in your big folder, which is going to be your, so I'm just building this out here. So this is your main folder, right? So under your main folder, you're going to have your Claude.md and you're going to have some context files. This may even live in a kind of business context folder that can be referenced in your Claude.md. So here you can be like in your directories. I have a context folder that provides all info about me and the business, right? So this is how, why I'm breaking this down is hopefully it helps you understand how you need to start thinking about the overall operation of it, because that's something that kind of miffed me for a very long time. And because I didn't understand it, I just went off in loads of different directions, just building stuff. But there was no real substance to it because I didn't have an understanding of how it operated, and therefore, when I built stuff, it just operated in silos, and it was working and it was helping me, but it didn't have context to who I am. Again, going back to context, which then created issues around just having to explain myself loads of time. So this is your first folder. You're going to create a Claude.md, and then you're going to create a context folder. This is like your subfolder number one, and this is your file number one, right? So it's going to be a context file. You may have different types of context files. So it might be, as I mentioned, a personal one, a business one. Maybe if you're in sales, you're going to have a target audience, so an ICP one. You might have a tech one, so that you know it knows what tools you use, and that's it here. And why it's important to chunk down these contexts, and what I was going to get into, is here. What Claude operates off of is tokens. Tokens just a fancy name for words, essentially, or something similar to it. Again, I'm not technical. I'm not going to get into the massive details, but the way the AI works, from my understanding, is that tokens are basically the numbers that a word are given, and the second and third number words are given, so that it understands sequence, and then it can build up predictive understanding of what you're saying, all that great stuff. But essentially, there is a context window. So what a context window is, and if you've been using Claude at all, you might have hit this, which is basically there's only so many tokens it can hold and read at one time before it starts going crazy. So what usually happens is you get this prompt, which is like it starts compressing or it breaks, whatever that is. And that's because you're just dumping loads of tokens into it. And that's what happens is it starts to just hallucinate or just stop working entirely. And the reason why these folders are important and the context within these folders are important is because then you can only load up what it needs. So it will know what it needs, but it will load it up based on what your activity is. So for example, I have a sales department, right? And in my sales department, I don't have like you can have a skills directory, right? But I like to have my skills under departments, because under my departments, I have my context, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a department. It can just be a workspace where you've got a specific activity that you do, whether it's content writing, that would be a specific workspace, for example. So whatever that is for you, I then have context, so it knows, okay, this is what we're about, this is who it involves, this is what we do. And then from there, I will have another folder underneath this. So that's my file. But then I'll have a folder, which is the skill. So I'll have skills, and then underneath that, I will then have another folder. And then I'll have my email follow-up. And then in this will be a reference file, typically, which is, again, a folder which has a file underneath it. So if I just map this out, so these are all, this is blue for folder, yellow for file. Yeah. So this is a folder. And this is a folder, and this is going to be my file. So this might be email example number 1. And why this is important is because a lot of time you'll sound generic because it doesn't know how you sound. So it's just going to sound like every other AI. And what you want to do is give it reference points so that the skill itself, so you'll have the skill MD, which is a file that will sit on top of, so it won't be nested inside reference because it needs to be read before that. But that will tell you, read the reference folder and the examples before writing a follow-up email. It will also have, and this is where we'll zoom out again and add one extra file to the top of everything, which is going to be your env. And your env essentially is where you store all your API keys. So you've got the env that is basically hosting any API that you want to call across any of your tools. So here in my MD, it may say, with the follow-up emails, check the Fireflies transcript. So that's what I use to record meetings. It will say, look at the CRM to see if there's any other updates in there, and then use the reference emails to write a follow-up email in this particular instance. So this may be my follow-ups for when I have a intro call with a potential prospect, and then it's going to create something that resembles what I want, because it will also have context for my business, because it can read this, and it will also understand what our sales process looks like, because it will read that. So it can take, and this is where it will take the ones it needs to create the output, which in this case will be a follow-up email here. So this will be the output that we want. And this may be, again, wherever you want this to go. So this can be as a file, it can be pushed into Slack, it can be pushed into your email drafts on Gmail or wherever you want to host it. So that's kind of where having just an organized system and understanding and starting off with a small project like an email follow-up is really good to just start connecting a couple APIs and then having an output that actually you can use in your day in, day out. Because I'm pretty sure that most people out there have an email that they regularly send that is quite repeatable, and it's a good workflow, because then from here, anytime you go into Claude, you'll be able to say, hey, can you load up the follow-up email skill and write a response to that email address, and then it will be able to look at your transcript, because it will drag it from the email address, and that's all I've written, and then my output is going to be a complete email that I can double check for pressing approve. So this hopefully gives you an example of how to start thinking about the way to use Claude and a specific use case that you can use, as well as how you need to start thinking about structuring your outputs so that you just have a clean environment and one that you can keep on top of before it gets too messy.